Hey everyone, welcome to the Discover Virginia podcast. I'm Joseph Trahan, your host for the #1 video podcast in Virginia, where we explore the rich history, vibrant culture, and iconic businesses that make our Commonwealth truly special and worth talking about. So get ready as together we discover Virginia. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Discover Virginia podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Trahan, and Happy New Year. I hope everyone is doing well and enjoying all the new things that 2025 brings. And if it's not 2025 when you're listening to this, this is still a great episode with you. I sit down with Edy Herrera, principal at Surrender Network, to talk about leadership and development of people and managing teams, which, yes, that is a saturated market, which is exactly why we're having Edy on today to kind of break through some of those common myths and barriers that exist within the space and provide some tangible tactics that you can take away. And I hope you enjoy this episode. Edy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Joseph. Appreciate you.
Yeah, so I'd like to start off with this broader question here of what does it mean to be a leader?
Man, that's such a great question. I think everybody has a definition for it. A leader, as we define it, is somebody who not only performs, but also develops and helps others perform. And so the work of a leader is best explained as being like a Sherpa. A Sherpa is a people group, but it's also a group of people that actually take people up Mount Everest. And that people group actually is born at elevation. They actually know how to go up Mount Everest and usually not only lead the way in setting the ropes, but also carry a lot of the stuff for the people that pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to go up the mountain. When you ask a Sherpa, hey, how many times have you been up the mountain? They obviously have gone up many times, but they don't keep count of how many times they've gone up. They keep count of how many people they've taken up. You know, into 2014, I took up 7 people. 2015, I took up 25 people. They only measure their success by the way or the success of the people that they've taken up. So that's a leader for us, is not only one who performs, but one who develops and helps others perform.
Wow, that's so fascinating that you choose the example of a Sherpa. When I think of that, I think of somebody in a very cold climate, right? in very outside of the traditional circumstances. And I think that's such a great example for business as well, because it's already under pressure, right? As a leader, as a business owner, right? You're already under the heat, under the pressure. And then furthermore, redefining that level of success is how many people you can take along,
Yes.
not necessarily how many people you can maybe step on to
That's
get
right.
up to the next spot. Speaking of stepping on people or maybe, leveraging people's assets to your gain and to their loss. I'm curious, what kind of beliefs and mindsets separates good leaders from bad leaders or people that just don't really, guide people up that mountain?
Yeah. Jeremy Kubicek, he's the founder of, co-founder of Giant Worldwide. It's some of the tools, leadership tools that we use. And he actually wrote a book called Humble for President. And it's an interesting dynamic when you think about, hey, what distinguishes great leaders from leaders that might not be so good, leaders that might be seen as bad leaders or unhealthy leaders. And the qualities of great leadership is people being for others, right? So you can really feel and tell, right? Think and come to the deduction of or feel, right, in your gut, in your heart, if a leader is for themselves as they are playing basketball, or if they're doing the accounting, or if they're selling something new, or they're doing operations, you can tell if they're for themselves, or if they're self-preserved, if they have something to prove, something to lose, or something to hide, if they're there to get theirs, or when a leader is for others, you can tell if they are looking to fight for their highest good, right? To actually develop the people around them, to see the greatest good come to the people that they lead. And so I would say that the biggest distinguisher between great leaders and the rest is the leader for their people.
Mm. Can you take us back to your first encounter with someone leading and it clicking for you, saying, oh, that's what it means to be a good leader, a successful leader?
Man, what a great question. In 4th grade, I had just come from Mexico. I was part of an agricultural kind of area of North Carolina. We flew into Greensboro International. I think it was regional at that time, 1996, 1997. And I was in 4th grade. I I didn't know English. I wasn't very smart. I had spent all summer long picking tobacco and mowing lawns. That's what we did,
Oh,
right? And we
wow.
lived in the trailer park, and I was mowing lawns for $10 a pop, and I thought that was a lot of money, right? Um, I get to the first day of fourth grade, and I'm looking at this board, and it's got everybody's names on there. Haley Bridges, Chad Holcomb, Justin. Don't even ask me why I know those names. I remember those names, but I just remember all these people in my grade. And at the bottom it said 0.0 Eduardo Herrera Silva. Right, I go by Eddie, and I was just looking at it. And Mr. Vincent, my fourth grade teacher, comes up next to me and he's looking at me and he goes, "These are AR reader points." He's like, "You're supposed to read the book and then you're supposed to take a test." He's like, "And then you get a certain amount of points based
Yeah.
on that." I didn't know anything about that. I didn't barely know English. And he's like, "Eddie," he goes, "I want to tell you two things. You are smart, right? And you could be at the top of that list." Now, nobody had ever told me I was smart. I was not good at school. I most of the time responded by fighting people, and violence was like my first choice of resolving things. And so I wasn't very smart at school. And then two, I had never wanted anything. I have three kids, and they have dance and they have gymnastics and they play instruments. I never had something for me and that I had ever exceeded at. And so Mr. Vincent in that moment called me up, and it made a huge difference. At the end of that year, I was at the top of the list, and I it changed my life. I actually became a really good student, and I would say Mr. Vincent called me up. He saw who I was. He came alongside as a Sherpa, as a
Yeah.
leader, and he casted vision, not only short term but long term vision for my life. That's what I get to do in the work that I do. I come alongside CEOs and community leaders, and I get to see who they are. We get to talk about their identity, their purpose. We get to talk about their value, and essentially, by calling them up and not out, I'm for them. And then we get to essentially mine their gold for them being for their people and what it actually looks like for them to be for their people.
Yeah. Wow. What an inspiring story, Eddie. Thank you for sharing that. And also, kind of sharing an example of what I would call as like what people don't normally think of as a leader. They think of maybe a president or a board member, but it's like, oh, there's teachers and pastors and, nurse practitioners that are leading a ship of people, leading a group of people to a common goal. So just casting that vision is really, I think, a great first step.
Absolutely.
Now,
Can I speak to that for
yeah,
a little bit?
absolutely.
So we have different leaders in different spaces.
Sure.
So for us, it's very holistic or exhaustive. You could say you have a leader who leads himself. You have a leader who leads, and he has to know himself to lead himself. You have a leader that leads a family, a mom, a dad, an older brother, older sister, right? Depends on your situation of life. You have a leader who leads a team, right? Those are middle managers, or those can be even CEOs who lead their own team. They lead a board, right? Or a board member or chair leading their board, right? Whoever is watching right now, you have a team, then you have an organization. They lead, and usually leadership wants to focus on organizations. And we're not talking about self, we're not talking about family, or we're not talking about team.
Right.
We talk about the organization, and then ultimately we talk about the community, right? So whether it's your church or a Jeep club that we're part of, or whatever it is that you're involved in, F3, right, at the beachfront, whatever it is that you do, you get the opportunity to lead in your community. Many people up to this point have led by position, but really leadership is about influence today.
Interesting. And I think that's, from what I understand, your description of a leader at the beginning of our conversation was somebody who leads by serving, that servant leadership model. And it's very fascinating to look at all the differences of how leadership is defined. I mean, the conversations around it are overwhelming. Seems like overwhelmingly saturated,
Mhm.
especially within the business community, like
Absolutely.
within a corporation or an LLC. Why do you think it's that way?
Well, you have two different types of leader. You have the reward centered leader. Reward centered leadership would be you come into a space, you come into a leadership role, and you are bedazzled, impressed by your role. You are excited to have the budget. You're excited to be able to be brought coffee to you. You're excited to lean back and tell people what to do. It might be polarizing to say this, but I think Cam Newton was a reward centered leader as a quarterback. When I see his interviews, it's about him smoking his cigars and having his suits and having his position. But then you have someone like the quarterback of the Vikings. What's his name? Do you know?
Joe something.
And then before that, it was like maybe Kirk. Right?
I don't know. Yeah.
And you have, or even just the one that it's the quarterback of the Eagles now, right?
Okay.
Jalen Hurts, right?
Jalen Hurts. Okay.
He actually. People talk about him so much because he is a responsibility-centered leader, right? He's there before people get there. He's there afterwards. He's studying the plays. For him, being a leader is a responsibility versus a reward.
Yeah.
And Cam Newton, I would say, is so much more talented physically, and yet Jalen Hurts has worked his ass off. Right. And so you have this reward-centered leadership versus this responsibility-centered leadership. And in the difference, and you said it, I'm just creating some color around what you said. It's service. It's being a servant. Right. And so by doing the responsibility of being a leader, it's having servant leadership mindset. But that's how it breaks down. Right. Am I excited or impressed by the position, or am I feeling the responsibility of the role of serving the position that I have been given?
Yeah. I'm curious, Edy, for you, and because we see this a lot throughout the examples you notated. If someone is talented enough or passionate enough or strong enough, they can kind of forcefully lead, right, with rewards and things like that. So when you do follow that path of a leader in that kind of setting where it's more about rewards, it's more about me and my suits and cigars, what kind of effect does that have on an organization overall?
Well, it's funny. Most teams operate at 60% of their capacity. As we go into different organizations, as the other guides in my world or other consultants in my world go into different organizations, 60% is what keeps coming up. Gallup had a report, 60%. So there's kind of this research happening right now that's keeps backing up this like 60% range of performance. By accident, you perform at 60%. So let's say you're doing good, you're financially viable, you're making headway, you're growing, you're maybe even having some mergers and acquisitions in your company, right? You're doing all these things. But if you're doing leadership accidentally, you're leaving 40% on the table anyway, right? And so that's the difference between being intentional or accidental about the different circles of influence that we're in, including teams and organizations, right? Because when you're intentional about it, you start to actually realize, and you talk to a CEO that's actually successful. I was talking to a guy down at the oceanfront. He has an engineering firm. He said, hey, we're leaving about 10 to 20% on the table. He's leaving about $2 to $4 million for his firm, right, on the table. And it's all surrounding leadership development, right? He's like, the idea of like if my people could be healthier, if they had better soft skills, if they communicated better, if they had better relationships and trust amongst each other, if they were aligned and bought in, if they executed on the things that we are called to execute on more effectively, if we had more capacity as a team, we would be going from that percentage that we're at to this other percentage, right? So
yeah. So obviously, you're an advocate for leadership development programs and scratching that part of the business and making sure that that's covered. But one could argue that, hey, that's because you're selling leadership. But you actually go a little bit deeper into the application of your business by highlighting these different variables, which is what I really enjoyed. One, about your website and just your guide. You hand out what all your competitors are handing out and say, hey, here's the baseline. Let's build from there. But you also highlight, and I think this is so tangible for business owners too, because what's the cost? What's the cost? What's the cost? Well, it's this for a leader to come in and then I have to send workshops and trainings, blah, blah, blah. It's this cost, but you're saying, no, look at what the alternative is. If you don't spend that money, here's how much you could be leaving on the table, because let's face it, we can't do all the tasks of our team all the time, right?
Yes.
And you're just micromanaging, which I think is I'll have you speak to that too. But
Absolutely.
yeah, what happens if you follow that micromanagement train as opposed to, does leadership mean more control? Like, or does it
No.
mean less control?
There's actually two questions in what you're saying, and I would say the first one, just to answer the idea of return on investment or what people charge, or I would say, let's talk about a company in this area, right? $20 million is what they made last year, and they want to improve by 10%,
Hmm.
right? 10% of $20 million is $2 million. Right. What I would do is I would come in and I would go, what's the plan? What are you trying to accomplish? Or what problem are we trying to solve for? And there's usually one or the other. Or otherwise, I'm not in the room.
Right.
So to speak to that, we are going, okay, we're going to solve a $2 million problem. So how are we going to do that? And we go down the line and we ask a series of questions. We can get more into that and we can circle back around on that. But we ask a series of questions that allow us to go, okay, this is exactly what we need to do. And then what I would do is I usually do go, hey, whatever you're going to pay on a $2 million problem, let's say it's a $200,000 contract, right? It has to be 10x. I have to connect myself to the return on investment. And that's probably the first insight that I wanted to talk to you about today was leadership development is an expense for most people because they don't tie their expense or their leadership development to an actual return on investment.
Mm.
And so it's an investment, not an expense when you do that. When you say, hey, we're going to increase by 10%, you can track me for the next year and what that looks like. And then we actually enter into a contract that's actually significant. It's not a training. It's a program. And at our best, it's not only a program, it's a system, right? We have great business systems and we have great financial systems, which is why you can afford to bring a consultant or a high-level advisor in. And so now the question is, okay, we don't want to do a training. We want to do a program or we want to do a system. How much do you actually want to invest, right? And knowing that your investment always should lead to some degree of return on investment, hopefully the marked out one. And I mean, sometimes more than the return on investment originally stated.
Yeah. So then, Edy, I mean, you've laid this out pretty, fairly. I mean, it's an investment. It's a return on investment that can lead to exponential growth for a business. So then why are there still bad leaders, throughout the chasm of managers and CEOs, pastors and teachers? There are bad leaders despite there being so much information and resources out there.
Well, let me not blame it on the leaders yet. Let me talk about since we're kind of trying to create a bridge, right? So the first one was it's an investment. It's an expense versus an investment.
Sure.
The second one was, and I would say there's three for me today, three insights is the second one is most of the time you end up with a bunch of confusion because you're reading Tony Robbins, he's reading Patrick Lencioni, I'm reading, Maxwell, right? So we're all reading different people and we have different vocabulary for everything.
Sure.
Right? How many personality assessments are there out there, right? Between Strengths Finders and, I mean, I love Myers-Briggs. That's everything I do is based on Myers-Briggs and the 5 voices. But then you have, there's Patrick Lencioni has his own system, right? Of the 5 different types of leaders. Yeah. And so you have this.
It's saturated. Yeah.
And so you end up with like us speaking a different language. It's Babel. Right? We are all trying to construct something and create a system or a company, and we're creating a Tower of Babel, and all of a sudden we're all speaking different languages, and we know how that story ended, right? It's unfruitful at the end, and people end up having to disperse. And that's usually what you end up with is just a kind of a confusion in leadership development. So what we did with Giant Worldwide is we said, okay, what would it look like to actually create a system that's actually the warehouse and rafters for everything that you have been learning, right? So instead of rejecting all of those great things that are happening, we're like, no, we're going to create a system that actually houses all of that. And we can actually begin to use a common vocabulary, right? That actually allows us to create a healthy culture that allows us to bring healthy leaders along the culture, creating healthy leaders that allows us to multiply leaders in our organization. The whole point of this thing, the tip of the spear is learning to have a vocabulary for multiplying leadership. But how can you multiply leadership unless you're healthy yourself, right? And so it's moving them through that process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love you protecting the leaders first and foremost. And I appreciate that because in no way are we trying to go after our leaders here. We're trying to make sense of this conundrum that we're in of a saturated leadership conversation.
Yes.
So it's almost like, I think of, and correct me if this is too broad, but like a universal principles of leadership is what you and your team have developed through your system, where it's like, hey, we're going to read the same books. We're going to have the same measurement for success. That way, when we are going after this investment, we have the same ROI and we're heading in the same direction.
Absolutely.
Kind of deal.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Something else that's external in the system is you want to lead, develop your people. So you grab your best and brightest, 2 or 3 of them, and you send them away and they go to Houston or Dallas or New York for the weekend, and you spend $15,000, $20,000. And during that time, they get amazing training. They get good food. They get to stay in a nice hotel. This is what happens. They get all of this inspiration. This is the myth of inspiration, but it's also an insight for our area, as we've been with leaders in Hampton Roads, right? This is the third insight, which is there's a lot of inspiration, but it doesn't lead to transformation. And we were talking about this a little earlier. Inspiration gives you a bunch of insights. Oh man, that's exciting. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm getting this revelation, these insights, and that leads to intent, which is all the things that you want to do to apply everything that you've been learning. But if you get too many insights and too many intents, on Monday morning, you open up your laptop, you're back, with a little bit of a layover, what do you call it, jet lag, and you're back at it, and you're like, what did we say again? What did this very talented speaker say to us again, right? And so we lose that. And so what we need is transformation requires perspiration in order for there to be transformation, right? Inspiration requires perspiration. We have to work it. We have to work one thing. We have to have one very practical takeaway. I do an event in our area called Leader Core, and I'll send you the link, right? But the idea here is at the end of Leader Core, I always tell them, right? If we do nothing else, I need you to have one very practical takeaway for you to actually work, for you to actually perspire in. And then that leads to transformation.
How do you define perspiration when we're going from the inspiration to the perspiration stage? How is that defined?
Like people in recovery say it works when you work it, right?
Works when you work it. Okay.
Right.
So you have to do something, right?
You have
it's
to do
the
something.
application of that piece of information you got. So if they said, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z every week, you got to make sure you do X, Y, and Z every week.
I'll tell you what, we'll breadcrumb it, right, for what we'll talk about at the end of today.
Yeah.
But I would say if the one application is you have to go home and you have to tell or ask the people that you lead, what's it like to be on the other side of me, right? None of us as leaders graduate from the school of self-awareness, right? I was going to say self-preservation, but we do graduate from our self-preservations.
Yeah.
None of us graduate from the school of self-awareness. And so if we go to our work, to our team, to our partner, to our spouse, and we say, hey, what's it like to be on the other side of me? You're going to be surprised by the awareness that you get when people let you know what it's like to be on the other side of you. What's it like to be on the other side of your leadership, right? What's it like to be on the other side of your fatherhood? What's it like to be on the other side of your management style? Right. So
absolutely. I want to touch on something you had mentioned earlier, and I definitely want to make sure we highlight this too, because before you can lead other people, you said you have to get yourself in check, right?
Absolutely.
So it goes back to, I think a lot of people refer to this just as general mindset. So self-talk, the things that you wake up feeling or thinking through. What do you think is the most maybe underrated quality of an effective leader? I'll start there. And this could maybe be, it doesn't have to be necessarily strength or intelligence, but maybe something that's maybe a softer skill that can be developed.
Absolutely. I'm gonna burrow down at this point on self-awareness, right? And I want to give you and by now hopefully you have an image of this, but I'm going to walk through this image, which is essentially all of us have these tendencies. These tendencies are neither good nor bad. They are what they are. I have a tendency to get upset when people interrupt me, right? That's a tendency, right? I'm upset. I'm angry. I tend to implode. And the pattern that is it's when it happens, right? When people interrupt me or when people just cut me off, right? It's not true. I'm just kind of going through something. You're welcome to cut me off. And then the action, right? The action is either going to be healthy or an unhealthy action. So the unhealthy action is, I'll double down, I'll interrupt back, right? And that creates a consequence where there's a divide in the relationship, or there's a kind of a breakdown in the peace of the space. And the reality that creates is, and I'm difficult to collaborate with, right?
Right.
Okay, now the pattern or the tendency, it stays the same. The pattern stays the same. But this time the action is, I'm angry because I got cut off, but now I'm going to just sit back. I'm going to ground myself and I'm going to listen, right? And I'm gonna listen to the question, and that creates a consequence of, I'm more present, I am calm, I'm at peace, and it creates a reality of me being cordial, maybe being invited back, maybe being in more of a collaborative space, right?
Yeah.
The reality is we have to know ourselves to lead ourselves, and in order to do that, we have to understand our tendencies. Those tendencies have patterns when they happen. Those patterns have actions, either healthy or unhealthy, which lead to good or bad consequences, which lead to our reality. Sometimes I'll walk back. Joseph, if I was hanging out with you and we were talking through a situation you're going through, we sometimes start with your reality, and I would ask, hey, what consequences led to this reality? You'd have insights on that. And then we'd talk about the actions that led to those consequences.
Sure.
And then we'd get to your tendencies, right?
Yeah.
So either we start with tendencies or we start with reality, but we work towards one or the other.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure from the leadership side, I mean, you don't always have the full picture, right? You may have a spreadsheet or a chart, or
Absolutely.
here's the SOP. This wasn't done. Why wasn't it done?
That's right.
But it sounds like from your perspective, Edy, you're almost saying like, hey, coming in from a place of like, why wasn't this done, as opposed to being willing and able to address maybe a gap in a system or workflow that didn't work out because of something that you may not have seen or may not have delegated correctly. I'm understanding that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
you're getting into a dynamic, which is for us, what does it look like to actually lead people,
right,
and actually bring the balance of support and challenge?
Right.
Now that we've established that self-awareness is what we're going after, now we have to go, okay, so now that I have that, let's stack it with another tool, which would be, what does it look like for me to challenge and support you? The way you feel or think about me as your leader is, let's just enter into that hypothetical, right? The way you feel or think about me as a leader is based on how I support and challenge you. If I support and challenge you, the Bible says Jesus came in the fullness of grace and truth, right? So that's like both of those, that support and challenge. And that's probably the greatest leader in my life, right? But for you, you know what I mean? Let's say it's we're in the marketplace. We're not talking about Christian terms. We're just in it, right?
Sure.
Support and challenge. It's a really easy way of saying it. And when you feel that from me and get that from me, it creates opportunity and empowerment, because I am able to say, hey, you didn't follow the SOP. I believe you can do it. I believe that you can stick to it. By the way, I need it done with the SOP in mind by 5 p.m. on Friday. That's the challenge. The support is, I believe you can do it. You're part of my team, and I'm here to help you. So let me know how I can help you in the process. But here's a really clear challenge, right? And here's the clear support. What you have is, when those things get off balance, then you start to feel the need for leadership development, the need for us to be self-aware. If all I bring is challenge to you, and I say, hey, it better be done by 5 or you're out of here. I can find somebody else to do that job for you.
Yeah.
You feel fear, you feel manipulated, right? Or if I am, that's what we call a dominating leader, a dominator. Or if I bring a bunch of support and I'm like, I just hint at it and I'm like, hey, better be done by 5. We're doing good. We're good. Okay, right?
Yeah.
And then it's not done by 5, and on Monday, my boss calls me and he's like, hey, Joseph didn't do that by 5. It should have been done on Friday. Somebody's got to go. And it's like, well, Joseph's got to go. I'm not going to go, right? Me as a supporting, protecting leader, a protector, somebody always has to pay the consequences, and it's not going to be the protector leader. It's going to be the person being protected. So that creates a culture of mistrust, right? Entitlement by you, and then mistrust also, right? So we create this dynamic where you're feeling entitled and mistrust, and also feel mistrust of me, because when somebody's going to get in trouble, it's not going to be me, it's going to be you, right?
Yeah.
The last one is no support and no challenge.
Okay.
These are the 4 types of leaders that we encounter in Hampton Roads all the time, right? The no support, no challenge leader is an abdicator. They're burnt out, they're tired, they're doing the minimum that they can to just get by.
Right.
And so the idea here is, we're self-aware, and we want to calibrate support and challenge as a leader. That's a liberator, right? My vision for Hampton Roads is, what would it look like to liberate Hampton Roads? What would it look like to bring high support and high challenge to as many CEOs or C-suite members or managers, right? As we work in different levels of the organization and actually bring liberation, right? We have a team of about 5 consultants. And so we are able to come in and actually go, hey, our job is to say really hard things to you. And I tell our team all the time, if you're not putting yourself in like our work in danger, I was like, almost every time that we're in there, we're not doing our job.
Yeah.
We're not bringing truth. We're not bringing challenge.
Business 101. Like if yeses come too easily, there's a problem, right? You should be able to ask or make a proposition or offer that could possibly lead to a no or a rejection or a challenge of thought. Yeah. And that's how you create that that term where you kind of forget the phrase you used there.
Liberation.
Liberate.
Yes.
Liberate a community of sorts.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to touch on one specific example because I think that especially within the lens of Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach could be a common theme, right? Especially with, let's just use, maybe part-time laborers or seasonal workers or maybe minimum wage workers where it's like, okay, well, I've repeated, delegated, etc., but nothing else is done. How can leaders still work to cultivate greater self-awareness to maybe inspire their teams or liberate their teams while also like not hiring bad people or maybe necessarily having a team member that's not pulling their weight and maybe causing another person who is a good leader to maybe do extra work.
Absolutely.
Right.
So the question then, and this comes up often is what about, you're a liberating leader. Let's say we're assuming that, and the people are not responding to it, right? What do you do there? Is that kind of the essence of the question?
Absolutely.
And I would say for all of us, I told you that we do a lot of our works on the Myers-Briggs or the 5 voices, and we have to know ourselves to lead ourselves, but we have to know our team to lead our team. You're on my team as of today, right? And so I have to know you in order to lead you.
Right.
Right. We need leadership language, visual tools in order to be able to do that. And so that's where it's helpful for me to understand your Myers-Briggs or your voice, right? I'm a creative.
Yeah.
I'm introverted. I'm future-oriented. I make decisions based on people and values. And I am a perceiver, which means I do some of my best work on the spot or leading up to a moment, right? But let's say you're not. Let's say you're a guardian and you are, extroverted. You're very present. You're very practical. You make decisions based on people on systems and logic first, and then people and values, right? And then you are organized. You take a little bite out of things every day and you accomplish things systematically and ahead of time and on budget, right? Different from me. And you and I are working together. We're partnered up and doing this work, right? And can you see the breakdown of how I would protect, how I would inspire, how I would speak based on how I am geared, future or present, or how I'm geared versus on how I make decisions in my life, right?
It's a different thought process, right?
Absolutely.
A different mindset and response to those conversations.
All through the 80s and 90s, we have this golden rule thing where it's like, treat others the way you want to be treated.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't work. It is a nice thought because hopefully
in kindergarten and builds from there, right?
Yeah,
hopefully.
Absolutely. But the platinum rule would say, I need to treat you the way you want to be treated.
Yeah.
Right. So when I talk to certain voices or certain personality types, I'm very practical. I'm very systematic. The questions that I ask, the insight that I bring, the way we collaborate is very systematic. And by the way, we're going to be done right at 11. Right. Yeah. I'm not a minute over. Let's say I talk to a creative though. We're letting 1,000 flowers bloom. We're, anything, spaghetti's on the wall.
I have conversations with my editor, the same thing where I'm like, hey, Michael, when's this? He's like, it's just not ready yet, Joe, and I'm like, well, I have to have this because I drop an episode every Tuesday. And it's like, but as a leader, I have to know like, okay, well, what's his skill set, his thought process.
That's
right.
Hey,
Michael, pick it on you.
Michael, I feel like I understand it a little bit better. Even just with those hints right there, we're able to come in and go, hey, how about we have a range or a thought of when it would be, right? For people like Michael and I, a due date is gold, right?
Yeah.
It's platinum, really, right? It's just
platinum,
going, hey, 5 p.m. on Friday afternoon so that we can review on Monday. But by the way, you have 3 weeks. So, I want to give you as much time as we can, but know that this is the hard date.
Yeah.
And it actually becomes really helpful for a perceiver like me. Back to your question, though, when we know our people, we can lead them better. And so most of the time, I'll ask a couple of questions. Have you really brought challenge? Most people think they've brought challenge to their people that aren't paying attention or that they're not responding. Have you really brought challenge, right? If we're going to protect the next level of leadership down, right? And again, it's not my job to protect leaders, but I really want to say, hey, what is within our controllables that we can do before we blame it on them? Right. So have you really communicated your expectations? Are your expectations realistic? Right? Do you want that edited tomorrow and we just film today? You know what I mean? Did you actually set a deadline? And do they understand what's expected of you? Have you communicated that? Right?
Yeah.
So that kind of sets up an expectation or a system, right?
Yeah. I want to dive next into the tools for transformation. You highlight this on your website as well, and we'll have the slides on the screen. But specifically, and I know you'd mentioned the phrase guardian, so I like to include maybe a conversation about the 5 voices assessment. Obviously, there's a whole program and training around that, right? Which I want to be respectful of.
There's a free link, so that you can kind of figure that out right away. So the link will include that. You can always pay $50 and actually have a full report.
Sure.
Here's the cheat way to cheat the system.
Okay.
And I always like a workaround. You can get a $10 a month pro subscription just for a month. Take the 5 voices and you get the full report, and then you can cancel your pro subscription.
There you go. There you go.
All right. If this is going on LinkedIn, I'm probably going to get in trouble, but this is great. I'm here for it. You know what I mean? But it allows you to kind of get to know your voice in depth. Right. Now, here's the other thing. If you take the 5 voices for free, and you email me, right, Edy@surrendernetwork.com, I'll send you a deck that I created for you anyway. So
very
either
cool.
way.
Thank you for that,
making
Edy.
it possible. Or what was your question?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So when it comes to the tools for transformation of getting into the weeds, so to speak, I'm curious, like, how do the 5 voices help teams better understand their dynamics and communication?
Absolutely.
And then furthermore, what other unique approaches do you bring to the executive coaching and workshop department that really help you differentiate yourself? Because like you said, there's classes, there's tools, there's training, but that's only the first step, is to access the training. Like you said, it's only $10. Literally anybody can get this information.
Yes.
But then how do you put the Edy elevation to it, the platinum to it?
Yeah. So I would say if we're starting with the 5 voices, right? The 5 voices help you discover your leadership voice, but then it moves actually to understanding the team dynamics and how teams work really well. You understand the power of your voice.
Yeah.
What happens when your voice is healthy? What happens when your voice is under moderate stress? What happens when your voice is under extreme stress? What you have is, if I can know your voice, if I can know your personality type, I can actually predict some of the leadership behaviors that are going to occur.
Interesting.
Right? So I know that if I'm going to put you under extreme stress, I begin to see and look out for those markers that are going to be there. And man, they are there all the time. I'm actually able to ask a leader or a CEO, hey, is that person under regular stress or moderate stress or extreme stress? And if they're like, oh, they're probably under moderate stress. And I'm like, okay, let's look out for these things. Do they do this? Do they do this? Do they do this? And they're like, how do you know that? You know what I mean? Or were you watching through a camera? I'm like, no, if you understand a person's Myers-Briggs or their voice, you're actually able to predict the leadership behaviors. And then we have a system for bringing them back to regular stress, right? Tools for diagnosing where our peace is at or where our hope is at. And then actually going, okay, what is within our power or our controllables in order to bring you back to a place where you're back under regular stress, right? What are the things that you're trying to prove or to lose or to hide, the self-preservations that we need to essentially grab and throw away, right? In the kingdom or in the world, right? I'm a trash picker-upper. I feel like my main role as a person is to come into a person's life and actually go, that doesn't belong there, that doesn't belong there. You have nothing to prove, nothing to lose, nothing to hide, right? And you are good enough. We grab the stuff, we throw them in the trash, right? Like, you are not not good enough, trash, right? You are good enough. And so being able to go, okay, what are your inhibitions? What are your prohibitions? What are the things that are your lies that you're believing about yourself that are limiting beliefs? And what are the actual restrictions that you have that are external imposed law restrictions? Man, there are a lot more inhibitions and lies that leaders live into than they actually have restrictions or prohibitions.
Yeah. Wow. That is very powerful to hear. And I'm sure very powerful for leaders, but not also for leaders, but for teams as well, because it's like, yeah, if I'm under stress, my attention to detail is going to be very different under moderate than extreme stress. And
Absolutely.
if you're, creating a product that, requires certain safety standards, right, then that could be a huge, huge dilemma, right? Or you're doing, if you're doing insurance claims or things like that, where people's lives are at stake, right? That's going to be a huge obstacle or challenge to really, propel your leadership team forward. How do we make that change happen for the better?
When you talk like this, it puts the development of our people first.
Right.
I'm working with a company in Newport News. It's called Power Mechanical, led by Rick Reuter. And he actually, over the last 3 years, we've been working together, and he's changed the slogan of the company recently to
Really?
We build people, then we build boilers. He's like, this is so important to us. And the 200 people that are part of his company know that the work of the leadership is to actually develop the people first, then develop the business and the financial model.
That's a lot of people, Edy. And when you think about going to your broader mission of picking up trash and, kind of changing the community for a better, I mean, that's what I think as from a team member's standpoint, looking at leadership and business owners, that's what we should all want, right?
Yes.
Because then you feel heard, you feel seen. I'm sure you kind of feel a little bit more like you're a part of a community as opposed to just, well, I got to push these keys from 9 to 5, hopefully nobody yells at me in between then. Right.
Yes. At the time of this interview, right, I haven't worked with a Fortune 500 company yet. Right. But I have continued to read and observe that those guys, that are leading companies at that level, the amount of investment in their development and the development of their people is actually high level. Right, you actually can't get to that place or level of organization unless there's a significant focus on the development of themselves and their people. Right, I would say you have to develop yourself. You have to develop what is leadership development or formation, if not what we do in the home as moms or as dads. Right. What is it if not what we do with our teams, and then so on. Right, so it's actually becomes front and center the way you're positioning it.
Absolutely. So, what's your advice for leaders who might feel or resist looking inward and checking your mindset and talking about feelings? Why do we need to do all that, Edy? What's your advice for leaders who may have resistance towards that, as we naturally do as self-preservationists and wanting to protect everything that we hold dear and not opening up to our team? Well,
it's kind of it's probably going to be overly simple. My question to you would be, how healthy are you? Right? Let's say we had to intuit our health this morning, and we had to go a mixture between how good's your purpose? Let's say 1 to 100.
Right.
How good's your people? 1 to 100. How much peace do you feel with them? How healthy do you feel about the provision that you have in your life? Do you have enough to live the life that you want? Not everything that you want, but do you have enough to live the life that you want to live? Right. How is your personal health? Like mentally, emotionally, spiritually? How's your personal health? And then ultimately, how is your place? The areas like your office, your living room, your backyard, the cities, the Hampton Roads. You're living in this area. How do you feel about the place where you are? Now we take that 1 to 100. For each one of those things, right? Okay. Purpose, place, people, provision, personal health, and we divide by 5 once we have 1 to 100 on each.
Interesting.
And that's your average. That's how healthy you are. Peace is power, right? That's how peaceful you are right now. And then we say, okay, so let's say for me, I'm probably at an 85 today.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. But then we ask that second question, which is, are you a divisive leader? in your organization or in your circles of influence? Or are you a negative leader? The difference between a divisive and a negative leader is a divisive leader actually, they'll talk shit about other people.
Yeah.
They're actually there to tear down other people. Whereas a negative leader is they're just an energy black hole where they're like, oh, nothing's going great. I'm tired. They create or impact negatively because of the energy or the way that they go about their work. There might be a dominating leader where they're like, stop it. Don't do that. You know what I mean?
Right.
No explanation. Right. And so divisive, negative, positive, which is the average leader we come across. Right. It's like, hey, my door's open if you need me. I'm here. I'm here when you need me. But the difference is between a positive and a multiplying, which would be X, right? Which would be, hey, I'm leaving the comfort of my office. I'm leaving the comfort of my place, and I'm coming to you, and I'm coming to develop you. I'm for you. I'm looking to see how I can fight for your highest good by bringing support and challenge, by seeing what tendency is most undermining your influence. We've talked about that, right? And by saying, what skill do you need to get to the next level? I have my intent pointed in your direction, and I'm for you, and I'm here to multiply, right? My hope is that, Joseph, in the next 3 to 5 years, you'd be just like me, that you can do everything that I do, maybe even better.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
A great leader I know said, greater things than these, right? You'll do, right?
Right.
That's what we're looking to do by multiplying, right? And so you have 4 different types of impact: divisive, negative, positive, or X. And that's a really simple way to actually go, hey, what kind of leaders do we have that surround us?
I love that. And I wanted to clarify that last one there. What was that last term for? So there's 2 for negative.
Divisive, negative.
Divisive and negative. And then for the positive.
Positive or multiplying.
Multiplying. Gotcha.
Which would be X.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so so in your experience within the Hampton Roads area, I personally would agree, but it's always good to look at the numbers too.
Yes.
The average is going to be more so positive.
Positive. Absolutely. The open door policy, the golden rule leader.
Sure. Yeah.
And now we're moving towards the platinum rule, which is treating people the way they want to be treated and actually multiplying in them, right? Having this intent of multiplication, of developing.
Yeah. Edy, thank you for breaking that down and highlighting that. And I'm sure on your journey to getting that Inc. 500 company to work with, you've had some challenges and tough calls to make. I'm curious for you, what's been the toughest leadership challenge that you've faced to date?
What circle of influence am I allowed to talk about?
Let's talk about the one that you want to discuss, that you're comfortable discussing here.
Well, I'll talk to you about the one that is most important to me.
Yeah, let's do that.
Which is fatherhood. It is the circle of influence, right? Self, family, team, organization, and community. I think for me, the team and the organization, going into different teams and organizations, having our own team and organization, those are hard. I mean, it requires so much intentionality. But what I see is you have these high-level leaders who are amazing at dominating themselves, abdicating or protecting their family, and then liberating their team and organization, which is why they have such a large organization usually. They're bringing a lot of liberation. Well, for me, that family part is what tends to get abdicated if I don't pay attention.
Sure.
And it gets abdicated if the leader or the CEO is not paying attention. And so for me, we aren't just talking about the team and organization. I think it's like one of those fountains connected to a spring. It starts at the top, kind of like a champagne pyramid, right? It starts at the top.
I think of the chocolate towers, but I got you.
Chocolate tower.
It's going to funnel down, right?
It's going to funnel down. And the self is at the center at the top. Family, team, organization, community.
And if there's any delay or clog at the top, it won't get to the bottom, right?
It will impact it long term. Something will rot out along the way, right? Because it's not set up the way it's meant to be. And so for me, fatherhood has been, it is the hardest, most engaging, most long-term, process, right?
Sure.
I think it's the most challenging thing to engage. I was in Colombia last week talking to a leader, and I said, hey, where are you struggling the most in your leadership? And he said, I am a distant father. He goes, I am not leading or developing my son. I am putting distance between me and him as much as I can. And his son is 11. You know what I mean? We're talking about him just being very honest and courageous to be able to say that out loud to me, right? That's the kind of long-term, that's the kind of relationship that I enter into with leaders. Is we're not just talking about teams and organizations, man.
Yeah.
We're talking about them, and we're talking about their leadership as a father or as a mother. And I would say I've come up with my own process, my own system. I wanted to give it to you. Wanted to make sure there was a place to say it, and I think this is it. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is fatherhood has 3 stages. The first stage is father gets to be a father from 0 to 13. That's a season of right and wrong, of protecting, of providing. And there's a strong fatherhood take there. Then
Right.
you have a season of brotherhood, which is from 13 onward to about emerging adulthood. And that's a season of brotherhood. It's a season of apprenticeship, of discipleship. It's a season of being in their life as brother, right? As older brother.
Right.
And then the last one is to being a dad to my adult children, right? Then I would be a friend. And so these 3 stages of fatherhood require leadership, and they require the most of my leadership
Right.
in being a father, a brother, and a friend. I would say that's probably my center of gravity. And I don't know, 20 years from now, I'll be on the podcast again. I'll probably only be talking about fatherhood then.
I love that. I mean, you look at the trend of like, especially influential business individuals, and you look at like what they value most, right? And you see some people that, maybe it's their car collection or their house collection, and then the ones that I personally have been drawn to are the people that, as a father myself, are like, hey, here's how I raised my kids, here's how I kept them involved, and here's how it impacted our community by and large.
Yeah.
Because if we set an example for how to lead our families, I think you set the example to how to lead the next generation of people. And I think that goes back to that transformation piece. It's it's one and the same, right? You can't just be good at work and bad at home, because it's gonna show up and affect,
Absolutely.
in those various places.
You and I, the first time we met at a park, right?
Yeah, I think so.
We're both foster dads.
Foster parent connection group. Yeah.
So this is probably part of your inner, center of gravity as well. Right?
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. Yeah. Because it's by and large, the reason for conversations like these, because you look at mass media in general, it's a national level, it's very much so outside of our traditional control, right? But if we look inwards and in our backyards of like, oh, what are people doing in the community? Where are the networking group? Where are the parks? Where are the other dads? And then, identifying those opportunities, for connection. I think that's ultimately what we encourage our listeners to do is to connect, get offline and connect. But also, going back to that empowerment and challenging piece of like stepping in that gap of where those conversations might not exist.
Absolutely.
Speaking of advice, Edy, what's a piece of advice you once received that still influences your leadership today? And I think the advice from your teacher was great. So maybe fast forwarding a little bit, maybe into young Edy, getting the ropes of leadership development.
Absolutely. I spent a significant amount of time with a friend of mine. His name is Chris DeFazio. In 2017, my dad was in the process of passing away, and Chris was a father figure in that season. We were smoking cigars late night, and we actually got together and we're doing a video podcast twice a week there for a little while. And in one of those moments, it's the end of the night, and we're getting ready to close out our time. And he says, "Edy, your life is already beautiful." And that was a moment of transformation for me. It was like a cue ball moment where I feel like I started going in a different direction. I think up to that point, I was very driven. I had a lot to prove more than anything else. And he said, "Your life is already beautiful." I would say that is a baton that my wife picked up along the way, and she almost rephrased it for me. And she said, "Hey, Edy, it can all go." And I know those sound like 2 different thoughts, but in some ways, we're living into these myths in this season in Hampton Roads and elsewhere as we travel. I mean, I told you I was in Bogota this past week, and the same leadership problems exist in Spanish and in English, okay? People, very high capacity leaders living into these myths of elevation. If I can just get high enough, if I can just get the next level, if I can just get the next company, if I can just get the next promotion, I will be insulated from reality. I won't have to worry about leadership or emotional things or spreadsheet things. And the reality is, your life is already beautiful, right? You don't have to keep elevating. You have to be at peace at the level at which you're at. You have to be healthy at the level at which you're at. You have to be content, surrendered, right? We call it surrender network because it's such a big word for us, right? You have to be surrendered at the level at which you're at. And then there's this other piece that allows me to fight the myth of elevation, which promises to insulate my life, right? And it never does, right? Which is my wife's phrase, which is "it can all go." And all it means is we have to keep the most important things, and we can't do that if we just continue to chase elevation. We have to realize that self and family come first, and that will make us a great leader for teams and organizations and communities.
Wow. Such a tough thought. And I think it parallels greatly with your first example, which is the Sherpa, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's only one mountaintop, right? You don't go on top of the mountaintop, top of the mountain's top.
That's right. That's called a false summit.
Yeah, it's a false summit. Yeah, you're probably falling at that point if you do, right? But that whole thought process and thinking through that sounds like it was very impactful for you, and I appreciate you sharing that as well, because that's just a powerful reminder that it can all go right, and understanding why it is you do what you do. I think that's Simon Sinek's, famous TED Talk for the end of all time. That's the only thing he'll be known for. Although he's a great leader in other regards, is start with the why. Start with why you're doing it. So as we look ahead to the future, Edy, if you could put your forecasting glasses on in the business world, how do you see the role of leaderships and leaders evolving over the next few years with the implementation of AI, with our somewhat unhealthy, hopefully more healthy relationship with working from home versus working in office, the impending change of our federal government and federal workers throughout the United States? Where do you see all that going in the world of leadership?
Yeah, we can't possibly forecast unless we go back, right? In World War II times, you have this dynamic where all the moms are going off to work, all the dads are off to war. The kids are being essentially institutionalized by the school system. We went from little school systems, or little schoolhouses, to like these ginormous jail-style buildings,
I prefer the term factory, right? It's factory, yeah. Golden rule,
You're right, factory.
Yeah.
Sorry, these kid education factories, right? And
very one-size-fits-all approach,
absolutely,
right?
standardized,
right?
Yep. Absolutely. And so what we have is leadership was by position in that time. Like you were the foreman, you were the manager, you were the leader because that was your role, it was your title. And today, where we are currently in leadership, those titles aren't as respected or admired or hoped for as they used to be.
Yeah.
Right. You are a leader by influence. And no matter, we're in an organization here where this is taking place, and people have influence as peers. They have influence up to their leaders. They have influence relationally amongst others. Right. There's actually those leaders who lead almost other teams by influence more than the person leads their own team by position.
Right.
And so today it is leadership by influence. Now you're asking me, well, how is that going to develop or go forward? Well, it depends on the subculture that we live in. Yeah. I think that we will be living in different subcultures, and that's going to become ever more present. And let me explain it this way. Joseph, you come to work and you have an experience here at work that is very unique. You live in a subculture. Whereas your buddy, Zach, who works across the company with a different leader, he comes to work and he might hate his job. Right. He might actually be under a dominating leader who micromanages him, who makes him sweat every day. And you come to work and your leader is a liberating leader who is giving you opportunities and giving the chance to fail, but also supporting you along the way and building you up, and he's for you. Well, I think that those subcultures, if we can have the vocabulary for it, we're going to be able to identify subcultures within companies so much better. Where we're going is being able to call it in order for us to be able to own it, in order for us to be able to respond to it and have some form of execution to that problem or to that subculture, right?
Yeah.
But I think that the words subculture or the identification of the health of a subculture is going to actually be how we identify where people are at. Instead of standardizing, one size fits all, we're going to learn to identify healthy or unhealthy leaders and healthy or unhealthy subcultures.
Sure. Making it easier to define and understand and identify what they should
Absolutely.
look like.
You're
Yeah.
right. Absolutely.
Interesting. So what's next for Surrender Network in 2025 and beyond? I mean, obviously you're in the leadership space, you go and travel. What's in the forecast for you guys business-wise?
Yeah. So for us, Hampton Roads is actually front and center. We have an event on Eventbrite. It's called Leader Core Hampton Roads, because we thought, what would it look like to make Hampton Roads synonymous with leadership development? Like we said, most people take an airplane, send a small team, and they take them and they send them elsewhere. And our thought is, why don't we create an event locally that allows you to get the same tools that Nike or Endava or Leidos or the Air Force is using? What are Fortune 500 companies using? And how can we bring that here? And that's giant worldwide tools. Chick-fil-A, the gamut, right, of different companies are using this. And so we thought, let's create something that's really accessible, really available, right, that is community-centered. And let's just give those same tools, right? So we talked about the Peace Index. We talked about the 100X indicator. We talked about the high support, high challenge matrix today. We even talked about the leader's mindset tool, right?
Right.
There's all these tools. They all have images connected to them so that it's easy for my 11-year-old, kids to look at it and take it on. So for us, we're going to continue to work primarily with our clients here locally. It is not our desire to keep going. It is our desire to burrow down on Hampton Roads, to keep going out of town.
Hampton Roads is the summit for you.
That's right. That's the summit, right? And to make it synonymous with leadership development, ultimately liberating Hampton Roads is our heart, right? So there's two things. Not only are we looking for more clients to work with, right? But we're looking for more, people would say competition. We're looking for more guides, more people to do the work of bringing these giant tools and leadership development to our area. You say it's saturated. I think that actually transformation is not saturated. I'm not seeing Hampton Roads be transformed right now.
Yeah.
So there might be a lot of effort to sell a product, but I would say our effort is to transform a community. And we can only do that by bringing liberation. And liberation comes by calibrating support and challenge to different organizations. So two things. If you're interested in leadership development in a way that it transforms, we'd be happy to have you join our team, right? And come, learn our systems. And then two, we'd love to work with you if it's something that this resonates with you. Not only having a training, but having an actual program. Even better yet, having a system, a leadership development system that it's not a short term, right? It's 3 to 5 years over time. We start with a pilot program, and then we move to, hey, now that we've established trust, now that we've established character, competency, character, and credibility, right? Then we move to more of a long-term relationship where we can essentially, kind of like Power Mechanical, we build people, then we do the job that we do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. Edy, thank you so much for your time. We'll have everything linked in the show notes down below, but where can folks go to learn more about what you have going on?
Absolutely. So surrendernetwork.com. Please feel free to email me, Edy@surrendernetwork.com. And I would say check out Leader Core Hampton Roads on Eventbrite locally. We have our first quarterly, March 7th here in Hampton Roads.
Very exciting. Thank you so much, Edy.
Thanks for having me, bro.
And thank you to our dedicated listeners for checking us out on another episode of the Discover Virginia podcast. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It's a very, very small request, but it goes so far for us on the show, getting great guests like Edy on the show. So be sure to hit that follow button, and we'll see you all in another episode very soon.